and Jason, I'll let you know when the light goes off.
Yeah.
Chair Voice, go ahead.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the January 9th Planning Policy Commission to order, and it currently is 6:30 p.m. I hope you all had a wonderful Happy New Year. Happy holidays. I'm disappointed I can't be there with all of you tonight. I'm paying for mine a little bit because I caught a bit of a cold, but I am thankful that we were able to do this virtually as well as in person. That way, my Kleenex cannot harm anybody. And for once, I get to wear a really great pink shirt with little judgment from everybody else. So, having said that, tonight is a hybrid meeting. The Planning Policy Commission is in person, but staff, chairs, or members of the public may be attending virtually or in person. Staff, it looks like it, but let's make it official. Do we have a quorum this evening?
Chair Voice, yes, you have a quorum tonight.
Excellent. So our first item of business is the approval of the December 12th, 2024 PPC meeting minutes. Are there any corrections or concerns to those minutes that were provided in your packet? All right, seeing none, those minutes are approved. We'll move on to public comment. And staff, has anyone signed up for public comment, whether virtually or in person?
No, Chair, they have not.
Okay. We are going to move on to regular business. And our first item of regular business is to elect a new vice chair. And due to the timing of this election, this is a short-term duration that will end in May of 2025 when we move to elect our new leadership for this year. So the following process will be used to elect the vice chair. First, I'll call for nominations. And when all the nominations have been made, we'll close those. If only one nomination is made, that member is considered elected by unanimous consent. And if there are multiple nominations, we'll hold time at our next meeting to have an election process. So board members would have the opportunity to discuss those nominees. We'll ask the board members to cast their votes. And basically the first board member receiving a majority of the vote would be elected to the position. So that is the process. So we can get started. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
I nominate Jesse.
Okay, great, Commissioner Kraft, appreciate that. So a nomination for Commissioner Patterson. Are there any other nominations?
I would also like to nominate Commissioner Patterson.
Okay. Are there any other nominations other than Commissioner Patterson? All right, well then by unanimous consent, congratulations, Vice Chair Patterson. Looking forward to working with you. I know we only have a short amount of time, but it's great that you're able to step up and fulfill this role. We meet for our chairs meeting the week previous to the PPC meeting, and also you'll be a big help when we conduct interviews in the spring for potential PPC recruits. So again, thank you very much for being vice chair. And there's no rest for the weary. So typically the vice chair would be fulfilling this role this evening. So I'm going to ask Vice Chair Patterson to assume the duties and facilitate the rest of this meeting. Clearly I'll still be here and participate as a commissioner, but it's only right and proper that our vice chair fills in and is able to facilitate the rest of the meeting. So please, Vice Chair, when you are ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Voice. Really hope you feel better soon. We are missing you here today, but we are glad you can join us virtually. Appreciate the nomination and election. So looking forward to working in this role with our commission and continuing the good work that we do. So feel better soon.
Thank you. Congratulations, Jess.
Thank you. Yeah, in the break glass in case of emergency vein, I will go ahead and talk about the next item on our agenda. We're going to talk about the update to the Green Necklace Amenity Wayfinding Standards and Heat Pump Noise Code. This item is to review the proposed code amendments to include Green Necklace Amenity Wayfinding Standards and to modernize the noise code to address the growing need for heat pumps and similar mechanical equipment. The Commission saw related heat pump code updates in 2024, which allowed heat pumps and similar mechanical equipment to be allowed in regulated setbacks. Madeline Nelson, our planning intern, will be presenting on this topic tonight. Go ahead, Madeline.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you again today. My name is Madeline, and I am a planning intern. You got it pretty spot on with what I was going to talk about tonight as far as the two code amendments. The first amendment is an update to the noise and accessory standards code so we can allow more heat pumps, air conditioners, and other similar mechanical equipment, more flexibility to be installed on residential lots. This topic has come to the Planning Commission earlier this year. So this is a continuation of that discussion. And then the second amendment is regarding wayfinding to elaborate on the standards for uses adjacent to the Green Necklace Plan. And then the purpose of tonight's meeting is to review and provide some initial feedback on the two code amendments, and then also to explore if there are any additions you want to add to the code. Okay, so then here are some questions we can keep in mind as we go through the materials. This includes questions like, is the list of mitigation for the mechanical equipment sufficient for the noise code amendments? Are there other considerations for the proposed wayfinding signs for Green Necklace amenity spaces? Or just, is there any additional feedback on any part of the code? So we can start by covering a bit of background on mechanical equipment. To be completely clear, mechanical equipment is referring to heat pumps, air conditioner condensers, and other similar heating or cooling home amenities. These amenities are becoming increasingly necessary as our climate shifts. We saw significant heat waves over the summer, which did pose health risks to certain members of our community who are at risk during heat waves and also don't have any sort of like centralized air control system. Go ahead.
It's Commissioner Kress. Does it also include house generators because that's now become topical, where you have them on the outside that they're not based on natural gas, so they come on automatically, but they're usually on the side of the house as well.
Stephen Badua, Assistant Planning Director. Commissioner Kress, that's a great question. With generators, that's actually regulated by different components of the building code in terms of how the installations go in. And so there's different regulations on those installations. But the noise as a nuisance is a broader regulation towards generators and other or similar equipment.
So the need to update the code came from public feedback, where we received indicating the state noise regulation for residential lots was too stringent, and for many homes when it came to the mechanical equipment, we found that mechanical equipment was not manufactured to be within the state noise limits, and so it was too loud to fit within the regulation. And then this summer, we also received feedback from PPC to explore more mitigation options when it comes to the noise abatement strategies. So here's the main piece of code we are looking to amend. It is an adopted state standard requiring noise levels in residential. It says that residential cannot exceed 55 decibels during the day and 45 decibels at night as measured from the property line. This is an issue because the equipment is generally 60 to 70 decibels, and as we get into some denser home varieties, as with middle housing, and also townhomes are a very popular housing variety in Issaquah, the property lines are shared, so the noise has to be updated to kind of allow for the basic mechanical equipment to be installed. So here's actually an example of a townhome that you can see in Issaquah, and you can see that the mechanical equipment is right on the property line, essentially. So this previous standard for the noise code wouldn't necessarily be a good fit for the denser home varieties that we have in Issaquah. And then we can also get into a bit of our proposed regulation, which you can see in Exhibit B. So the intent of the amendments is to allow mechanical equipment to be installed while keeping ambient noise levels within residential communities to an appropriate level. To do so, we are requiring that if mechanical equipment exceeds the noise levels according to state standard at the property line, which is that 55 decibel limit, then the property owner must implement mitigation standards to the extent that is practically feasible. And these include strategies like placing the equipment as far away from the neighbors as feasible, using fencing or vegetation as a noise buffer, or installing quieter components onto the equipment. And if the equipment is able to, then running it on a quiet mode overnight, which not every equipment is able to, but some of them do have the option. The second part of the amendment exempts single-family residential from the state standard and instead moves the hard limit for the noise limit to 73 decibels, which is recommended per the RE 270. This is a sound rating system for outdoor unitary equipment developed by the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute, which is a North American trade association. We're kind of deferring to the experts in this situation. RE 270 is already adopted by a couple HOAs within Issaquah, such as Talus and the Highlands. However, instead of just adopting RE as like the standard, it does have a few more complicated methods of measurement. It includes considerations such as like air and water temperature to determine sound levels. And to keep it as simple as possible, we recommend a flat standard of 73 decibels. Which is reportedly the equivalent standard to RE 270. So then with this code updates, mechanical equipment has the room within the code to make a noise to an appropriate level, while also providing mitigation efforts to keep the noise within a reasonable level, to preserve the quality of residential neighborhoods in the city. And this kind of concludes the heat pump section. So one question we have for this section is, does the list of mitigation for mechanical equipment, is it sufficient for the noise code amendment? Or should we consider more options? Are there ones that feel more appropriate than others? And so on. Then we can kind of start moving into the second half of the proposed code update. Yeah, please.
So it's interesting. So if the state came up with standards, they must have had some basis of why they thought those levels were the right levels, but it sounds like the units that are being built don't meet that. So I have a couple questions. How did the state get to that point, if you know? And then what have all the other cities been doing? Because everyone's in the same boat if the state put a requirement that's not actually very achievable. And then I do have some questions about mitigation in a moment, but that's some of that back. As I read through the packet, I was like, yeah, how would they come up with these numbers if the units don't do this? Is it just wishful thinking, or is it because they do exist but they're too expensive, or I'd love to learn a little more.
Great question, Commissioner Class. So my understanding from how the state came up with at least the levels for the decibels is just based on how they determine what was a tolerable noise level at the time that they developed the standards. And it was prior to development of modern mechanical equipment like heat pumps and AC units that standards were actually established. And so those type of equipment installations were not in consideration when that standard was being developed, which is why, to help answer your other question, what other cities are doing, other cities are considering the same exemption because the state hasn't indicated that they're going to be changing the decibel levels allowed within the state standards to accommodate the modern commercial products that are being put out, particularly for AC units and heat pumps.
Thank you. Does it also make sense for all the cities on the east side maybe to have the same, if they have the same issue, to all say 73 and make it simple for Everyone, do you guys have that conversation with our sister cities? Or is everyone kind of trying to figure this out themselves?
The building officials for all the cities have regular conversations on topics like these, and so, but it's really up to every jurisdiction how they create these exemptions.
Quick procedural question here. Would you like us to wrap up the noise mitigation topic first and then go to the wayfinding, or what would be the most helpful for you all?
Maybe it would be okay to have a discussion about the mechanical equipment, so we can kind of keep all our thoughts on this, during this part about the same topic.
Okay,
If
perfect.
that's procedurally okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. So yeah, let's open it up to questions for the commissioners' discussion on the noise mitigation piece, the mechanical piece. Go ahead.
I like the idea of having, like, if it does exceed, then here's a list of things to do. Hopefully we would give them some guidance of what that means in terms of fencing and other ways. I guess I'm curious if they don't do that, then what happens? It's almost like, yes, you can have it, but you have to do these other things. But if they don't do those other things, what is the outcome of that?
We haven't written that part down in the code yet, but I would assume that that if they explore having the mitigation techniques and then find that they're not practically feasible, or that they are practically feasible and proceed to not comply with the code, that would be the same as breaking the noise code and be the same as if you're exceeding 73 decibels and, be issued fines if it gets to that point and so on, as if it was a noise violation.
And if I can add, as part of the development review process for these type of permits that'll be issued for the mechanical installations, they won't be approved unless the mitigation is actually installed. And so there would be an inspection once the installation has gone in and mitigation has been, we've been told that mitigation has been gone. And then inspectors will go and make sure that that is actually done.
Commissioner Kennedy.
So you mentioned there is an inspection, because that was actually my question, is what resources do we have in place to enforce the noise ordinance and or the mitigation factors? So there's an inspection once it's installed. They test the noise level to determine what it's at, check for mitigation. What if, even with mitigation factors, it's above 73?
If with mitigation factors that it's above the 73 maximum level, then the permit wouldn't be approved. And to answer your first question in terms of resources that go towards enforcement, it would initially start as some type of code compliance issue. If assuming it's installed and there's still kind of a noise issue, it would be then evaluated as a noise complaint with code compliance. And then we would work with the state on any type of mitigating issues that would go through that code.
Commissioner Zakharoff.
Thank you. Do we know that the equipment with 73 decibels maximum is readily available for the people, or it's very hard to find, or something like that they really need to try harder?
It's my understanding that it is pretty unusual for mechanical equipment to exceed 70 decibels. I know that there are certain situations where it does exceed, or it goes up to 75 decibels for certain like louder air conditioner varieties, but that's only like a 2 decibel difference, which could be mitigated through some of the strategies that we suggested. But generally speaking, mechanical equipment does not exceed 70 decibels or so.
Go ahead, Commissioner Kress.
Thank you. This is actually one, when you mentioned Talus and the Highlands, they've already been dealing with this. So there's probably it's interesting. Go back to their big giant HOAs to learn how they've handled that would maybe be helpful for the city as well, because they may have, here's a resource of what they've given people to how to mitigate noise and all of that. So it sounds like they've already are just ahead of it, which is good to hear.
And just a shout out to Chair Voice. I am keeping an eye out for virtual or physical hands in the air from you. So feel free to signal if you have something to add in here. There we go. Go ahead for it, Chair.
Sure. Thank you, Vice Chair Patterson. I guess the one question I have, and again, reading this, is it means so our multifamilies or single family residentials would all be held to the 73 decibel height, maximum. Is that correct?
Chair Voice, yes, that's correct.
Okay. I don't know if the only thing I would question is obviously single family residentials are more spaced out. So more of those mitigation techniques will probably be more helpful. My fear is like some of our multifamily, like those townhomes you showed, you might have sections of the city that are kind of humming at certain parts of the day. So that's kind of my only consideration. But if it's just a blanket thing throughout the city, I don't know if there's reason to call that out. That certain multifamilies where they're grouped tighter together. Obviously, the city's moving towards more middle housing, more different types of middle housing. That's just kind of, obviously, people's well being and welfare takes precedent. But as more of these things get installed, again, I think you're going to have some of these places that are a little bit tighter grouped together. Again, they can have a very strange, unique sound at nighttime where the whole thing's humming. And then you can go into an older neighborhood where you don't hear it as much. And I just wonder if that's been a consideration. Anybody's considered that at the city?
Chair Voice, actually, you bring a pretty important point in terms of like why we are even pursuing a change with our code in the first place, is because there have been a lot of instances, particularly in the developed areas of Dallas or Highlands, where you have a townhome development that wasn't installed with AC or heat pumps. And we, much more recently in the last several years, have had a lot more demand for a lot of those installations. And there really isn't a easy solution to mitigate particularly noise when those townhomes are wall to wall to each other. And so we have purposely designed kind of this code so it allows us a little more flexibility to work with any of the individuals on the mitigating factors to minimize that sound impact on their neighbors. But there is no easy solution to it to really reduce it, particularly to meet the state standards that it is now.
Well, one thing that's also probably, and this was kind of my follow-up, is one thing that's going to make it a little bit more interesting is, one of the proposed amendments on our docket is, actually renaming the single family residential zone. So I don't know if it gets a little bit more convoluted, but anyway, that was kind of my 2 cents. But thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Chair Voice. Commissioner Zakharoff.
I just would like to add to Commissioner's Voice, to Chair Voice's comment. As a representative of a very multifamily community, we have about 114 units in our community. Currently, and probably in the future, it's not possible basically to install any AC systems except for simple window systems or simple systems that you put in your condo unit, because anything and everything will exceed the noise level. 114 units working simultaneously will make the whole Issaquah go crazy. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Zakharoff. One thing I wanted to remind our commission is we were tasked with the question of, is the list of mitigation for mechanical equipment sufficient for the noise code amendment? So if you have any thoughts on that particular question as well.
I guess I'd want to know what are the Highlands and Talus, because they're ahead of us on this, so they may have a good list. If that's already included in that list, that's great. I mean, we may learn from others on that.
So the proposed code amendment is consistent with the language that each of those HOAs have in place now. So it's following similar standards that they have established within their rules.
I had a couple of comments to add real quick, and then I'll switch over to you, Chair Voice. One on the topic of kind of additional mitigation. One potential addition would be to optimize the direction that the units fan or whatever's making the noise is kind of away from neighboring or spaces or living spaces. It's kind of on the same track of being away from the house, but also whatever's making the noise is pointed in a direction that's least impactful. The next one might fall under, I think it was, added equipment or components to mitigate sound, but I read that kind of elevated placement on like vibration absorbing, pads or whatever it is might help reduce the noise. I think that's one that probably falls under a component to add to it. And then I think probably kind of on track with what Chair Voice was mentioning, which is the consideration for some separate code for high density or multifamily areas. So you had shown that example of the townhomes with the heat pump units out front. So can you clarify how that would be, I guess, taken in with the code updates? Like, would that be allowed but need to be mitigated, or how is that? Would that still be feasible with this code change?
For at least existing developments, it would be allowed installations with mitigation. For newer developments, we would actually work with them so that placement of these units would be in a location that likely wouldn't require mitigation. So that would be part of the building permit development review process.
Awesome, thank you. Chair Voice, go ahead.
Thank you. And yeah, I guess the question Jesse brings up or Madeline brings up as far as mitigation techniques, again, I would refer to experts who work in this field. I guess the only thing, are any of them damage the equipment or the efficiency of the equipment? Because for a lot of homeowners, this is a big investment. So that would be my question and concern. I know one was a sound blanket, one's vegetation. Does the vegetation get into the system? Does it cause problems? That would probably be my concern as far as what better solutions to mitigate. I'd kind of have to refer to people that do this for a living. The only other thing is I don't know how much bigger building agreements we have. I don't know if we're going to see other Taluses to that extent or other Highlands. Kind of seems like Issaquah is getting to the point where we're going to start doing more spot infill. But yeah, that would be my thing is does any of this damage the equipment as far as the mitigation techniques that you guys are offering?
Chair Voice, to clarify, is that a question or a comment?
Go ahead, Chair.
Yeah, kind of both. So that's my concern, but you know that if any of those mitigation techniques, because again, I mean, it's expensive. Some of these air conditioner, AC units, heat pumps, I mean, they can be in the thousands of dollars. So a concern and a question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. That's something that our inspectors definitely work with the applicants on when their installations are going in. They don't want these going in where any mitigation factors that we're requiring is going to lead to any potential damage to the equipment. So they always make these type of suggestions, but as well as the installers also want to make sure that their equipment's not being damaged by any mitigating factors either. And so they likely will have recommendations of techniques that they've used in other areas to make sure that the equipment doesn't get damaged.
Thanks, Stephen. Commissioners, any other questions, comments, concerns on this topic before we move to wayfinding? And Madeline, did you get what you needed for that topic?
I did, thank you.
Excellent. Right over to you for wayfinding.
Right. So the wayfinding amendment is to elaborate on standards for uses adjacent to the Green Necklace Plan. So here's the code that we were looking at. This applies to uses adjacent to the Green Necklace, and it requires that developments include clear and intuitive wayfinding to communicate how to access adjacent parks. So we're hoping to clarify what clear and intuitive means and kind of apply some standards for that. First, I want to briefly describe what the Green Necklace Plan is. To support our parks plan, we adopted this Green Necklace Plan, which was intended to identify parks and other green spaces in the city and connect them through bike and pedestrian infrastructure. To accomplish this, the city adopted code instructing new and redeveloped lots along these purple lines on the map up here to participate in the Green Necklace through constructing trails and providing wayfinding. The trail portion of that requirement already has defined standards. So with this amendment, we were hoping to clarify the wayfinding portion. So then we can get into our proposed regulation in Exhibit A. So the first half of the regulation is very straightforward. This would just apply to new development or redeveloped lots and the uses adjacent to the Green Necklace Amenity Zone. And then they would also have to provide wayfinding. And then we have standards on this slide, which we can get into. So there's really just like two standards when it comes to size and content. The sign face must be at least 3 feet tall with primary text at least 2 inches in height. The signs must direct the viewer to the adjacent amenity, not obstruct pathways or trails, and must be durable. The standards for the sign are currently designed to be somewhat minimal to allow developments greater options for the sign design, and then the image on the right side of the slide is a bollard panel sign, which is an example of what these standards could look like in action. And then this image was taken from the Issaquah Parks wayfinding plan, so it is in line with like the city's internal wayfinding plan. And I did want to take just a moment to recognize that the name of the park connection plan is changing from the Green Necklace to Creeks to Peaks. However, the public name is still Green Necklace, and this will be a process to change it over in the future. And then here's just a general timeline of the code amendments. Right now we are in the initial review stage. We are anticipating having a public hearing in Q1 of 2025, then having adoption by the end of Q2 next year. And with all of our standards and amendments covered, we can formally enter the discussion part for the wayfinding amendments. So then here's our discussion questions, and thank you for your time, commissioners. If you have any feedback, that'd be very much appreciated.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Madeline. Appreciate that. Commissioners, any feedback on Green Necklace, I'm going to say it right this time, amenity spaces? Go ahead, Commissioner Kress.
Hi, it's Commissioner Krass. Who builds these? Is it always the city, or is it mostly the city or government agencies? I'm like, who would build
The wayfinding signs?
yes,
It would be the private developers.
private developers too?
Mhm.
So the ones that I see now are not the cities, or are those the first ones that we see now are all city-based ones?
Are you referring to the one on the public trails?
Yeah.
Those are the ones that the city has produced and
Okay.
installed. And so what this code amendment is asking for is for when a private development comes in adjacent to one of those Green Necklace
Okay.
amenity being some of the trails, that they have a similar wayfinding signage pointing to the trail.
This is essentially giving them a spec of the ways so
Correct.
that all work well together and all of that. Okay.
Correct.
Chair voice.
Thank you. So this is more of just a thought. I'm thinking like 20 years out. And again, I don't know how you would do it. Well, I guess you do it through regulation. I'm thinking of like theme parks, right? You know, you go to Disneyland, you go to, California Adventure, things like this. And all of the signs are the same in certain areas. And I'm just wondering if that would look more uniform and cohesive rather than having a sign standard where you can pick, choose, and then if you're living in Old Town, if you're going through Old Town creeks and peaks, maybe they all look like rustic posts where it's wood engraved with yellow highlighted text. Maybe you go up to the Highlands and it's more similar to what you have on those kiosks. But I just wonder if we can make it more uniform in certain sections of the city. I don't know what anyone's thoughts on that, but it seems kind of strange, whereas like the Issaquah Highlands has the exact same standard for a part of the city that looks entirely different than down by Rainier Trail. And again, I'm just thinking like 20 years out, obviously this would have to happen over time. But just wondering your guys' thoughts on that.
That's wonderful feedback, Jason. That is actually getting to the core of what I'm hoping to gain from our discussion today, that having more specific feedback on the design standards and just standards overall is excellent feedback.
Commissioner Kennedy.
I mean, I guess I'm mostly just ditto what Commissioner Voice said, because I noticed the new ones up in the Highlands. You go walk around Central Park and there's new, it's like, oh, there's great little arrows saying where the new fields are. And they have a very distinct look to them. And yeah, if we're going to do wayfinding signs around the city, once we've started, it would be nice to have a fairly consistent look to them. Otherwise, are you in a different city? Are you in a different place? Does this mean the same thing here as it did there? It would just be nice to have consistency.
Commissioner Krass.
So I wasn't sure if Jason was saying they should be different or they should be the same. Because like right now, I think the Highlands and Talus, they're kind of away from town. But if I look at Issaquah Valley and Old Town and Central Issaquah, those are lines that we've drawn. But if you're in town, you don't know where those lines are. So those are all kind of contiguous. So I would hope that those may all look similar because no one knows that they cross the bridge and all of a sudden I'm 50 feet away from Old Town, but like should the signs be, I think they should be similar. I think there was an interesting question that Jason mentions, like things like the Highlands or Talus, which are kind of like their own separate place. Should they look the same? It'd be nice, but do they have to? Maybe not as much. But I think the ones that are next to each other, you don't want to have ones that are disjointed or you having consistency. That's why highway signs are great around the entire country. They're all exactly the same. They're same specs, same fonts, everything. Like they're seamless. So interesting debate on this one.
Yeah, and actually, before we get to you, Chair Voice, I actually have a clarifying question that kind of threads through all of our initial comments to the staff, which is maybe clarifying my understanding of this a little bit. So what I read in the packet was that basically this would apply to commercial, multifamily, and public, right? So like city-owned versus public or private-owned, basically anybody who has an adjacent property to the trail, right? So any development that's adjacent to the trail.
Yeah, it'd be pretty much any development adjacent to the purple
Right.
trails on the map, as long as it's not a single-family development. We just thought that wouldn't make a lot of sense for single-family.
Gotcha. So I think one thing that we're getting a little tripped up on is like, we know we recently redid a bunch of signage, wayfinding signage in the city, right? And it's all uniform. It looks really nice. Is the idea here that there would be like individual property owners like putting up their version of that, or would they have to do the same design that like the city has done?
It really depends on the standards that we develop tonight. If the commission finds that it'd be more pleasing or appropriate to have the uniform design across private development, then that would really be standards that we would create tonight, or kind of start developing those standards tonight. Currently, the standards are pretty flexible, so if we want to develop more like uniform standards, then we can have that conversation for sure.
Gotcha.
If I could add a little more clarification, Vice Chair Patterson, with what's being proposed tonight is primarily focused on private development. For public, we have our wayfinding plan that with more specific details, so that's going to stay consistent, particularly with the new signage that has been installed throughout the city. With what's being proposed now, it's very similar detail that'll be going on private development and private streets, which won't be maintained by the city. And that's what this standard is really. So it'll be consistent in terms of the type of signage to go in, but it'll likely be different color to be consistent with development. It'll be potentially different text to be consistent with any other type of signage that's being installed with that new development, so they can stay on brand to how they're developing those new homes in that area. One key difference I would add on between Highlands and Talus and the rest of the city is Highlands and Talus had development agreements with very specific design standards, particularly for wayfinding, which is always going to be different than what the city installs. And so even though we put this standard in place, any new development agreement, which there's none upcoming that this would impact, they would come up with new sign standards, regardless of what this standard is, to go into the wayfinding or into the development agreement. And so it may be different despite this new regulation.
Excellent. Thank you for those clarifications. Chair Voice, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Stephen, for the clarification. I guess, again, I'm kind of two minds, but if this is more about public property and things of that nature, and we already have a specific design, then I guess I kind of lean more with Commissioner Krass, where it'd be nice if it was more cohesive throughout the city. To me, I mean, what's so interesting about Issaquah, it's a collection of neighborhoods, and obviously each neighborhood has a different story and background. And that's kind of what I thought more of. Again, kind of like more of like a theme. Like, so if you were in Old Town, again, more rustic kind of a wayfinding. But again, it's a little bit harder if the city already has their specific standard that they've been working through and working with for, however long, but you kind of bring up a point. So those development agreements with Talus and Issaquah Highlands, I mean, they kind of lets you know you're in a separate neighborhood of the city, which I kind of like. But again, if we're only talking about partial, then maybe it'd be better off to just try and make everything look cohesive.
Just to clarify the commissioner's comments, is the hope that these wayfinding signs be the same color, text, exact same design as what the city has recently installed? Is that what commissioners are asking for?
So if these are the properties that are bordering the purple trails and all of that, I think there's a value of having them look consistent. If the goal of the sign is to get them to the purple trails and the other things, and who built or paid for them may be irrelevant, but it's really it's a direction for kind of city thoroughfares that are not by streets, but they're parks and trails. So having them look, even if on private land, that they match what Issaquah does, I think there could be some value there because it's pointing you to the more public areas. I'm not sure how Atlas, like a big apartment complex down here, I think they have some type of signage to go different places. I can't remember what they are or what they say. But I do think if I'll use them as an example, if part of it is to get you to the trail that takes you to the park, having it look like one that's part of the city already may add some continuity that those are part of Green Necklace, even though we're not calling it that anymore, but along that. So I think there's some value there. And I'm not sure, you said there's not a lot of big commercial or development agreements right now that are planned where someone would say, hey, wait, we want to have our own sign. That's not currently in the mix.
I mean, there's other development agreements currently that are active that have their own design standards, particularly for any signage that they're going to be installing. If they don't, then they're going to be, particularly for development agreements, it defers to whatever's established in code. So that's when this would actually kick in.
And do we feel like if you're a developer, I mean, Stephen, I love your opinion on this. A developer, would they like having this type of, I wouldn't say requirement, but I guess it is a requirement to say, okay, if you're going to be right bordering these things, here's your spec to do a sign, and we want you to put a couple of these up. Would that be a big issue to them, or is this like a non-issue?
I think developers typically like the level of detail that we're providing and what's proposed tonight, particularly because it provides them flexibility to put that signage in on brand with what they're installing similar. Like if they have other signage on site, it'll be very similar knowing that this was all one community developed together. But they don't like what it is right now, which is there's no detail. It just says, please install wayfinding. They always ask us, what exactly do you mean? And so providing some guidance of what we're asking for, providing similarities to what we install, which is why we have that standard, very similar to what we have in the wayfinding plan with the Parks Department, is to provide that guidance, but still allow them a little more of that flexibility to be on brand with what's being installed.
Commissioner Zakharov?
As much as I usually like everything to be uniformed, I also know a big history of Issaquah Highlands, because I've been serving there as well. And I know the history of the signage making and all the wayfinding there. And also the question is that some of the parks there, they're kind of like parks that are Highlands parks and some parks that are city parks, that city rule parks. So I would basically have to say that I will be in a position that Highlands and possibly Talus, I'm not sure what kind of agreements are there. They have a right to keep their current signage because they've just they installed it and they just worked on this, and they worked on this for a long time and spent a good amount of resources. But the rest of the city, if we want this uniformed, I would agree it has to be probably uniformed. So not just we have this standards, but it's probably we have this example and the sign looks like this, and that's how our signs look on all of the trails and paths, and you should produce the same sign. maybe even we can, if we can recommend them where to produce them, or I'm just, that part I'm not sure about, but yeah, they should look exactly like this. Thank you.
Commissioner Kennedy.
So I have a couple things. One, first question, I'm going to go back to the Highlands. So there's a lot of wayfinding in the Highlands, and they have done a bunch of new signage that's very Highlands branded. But then I've seen the new, I'm assuming, city signs in Central Park, because Central Park, as I understand it, is a city park versus a Highlands park. And they have a very distinct look. They're black, blue, white. They have a very distinct look to them that's very different from Highlands branded. So the two things, well, I guess first question is, are the signs I see in the Highlands for Central Park the same look and feel as the signs that you've talked about that are down here? I don't know that I've seen similar looking signs down here, but I haven't looked for them either. Are there similar sort of black, white, blue, real bold, pretty modern looking signs down here in the core of Issaquah that look like those ones?
If you're referring to the Central Park signage that are owned by the city, then yes, they're consistent. If you look along Rainier Trail just outside the building here, if you walk that all the way down to Community Center, you'll find very similar signage.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yes, the Blackberry Park looks a lot like what's in the Highlands.
Yes.
So, I agree that each neighborhood's going to have its own feel. Like the Highland has very Highlands branded sort of wayfinding signage within the neighborhood, but to the extent we're trying to direct people, so separate from within the neighborhood, you're getting someone either from Central Issaquah out somewhere else. Central Park's a very busy park, used for a lot of things, is a city park. If we're going to direct people to that, yes, then consistency from, you're down here, you're off I-90, you're trying to find, well, where's Central Park? I'd assume it's in Central Issaquah. No, it's actually in the Highlands. We need to have consistency to get people there. If it's all a city-based item, and or we've talked about the green necklace, then those all need to be consistent. Otherwise, people are are going to have a harder time figuring out what's supposed to tie to what. So it's sort of twofold. Yes, have neighborhood branded items for a given development, but anything related to that city specific, green necklace specific, have that consistency. So I know we're talking difference between the city already has its rules, regulations around signage. We're talking private development. If you're going to develop this land and it has anything to do with city land, city park, because if the Highlands were doing it today, that's a city park, or wayfinding to a central location, a central trail, then it has to follow the city's specific standards. If it's within your neighborhood, it's sort of specific to your development, then it can be your brand. Keep it on your brand. Make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think basically it's like, should the signage for the green necklace be uniform to what the city has provided, or should it be uniform to the development's signage, but with the standards that you have provided here? So I think what we've kind of discussed tonight is taking the standards a step further to align with what the city signage looks like that's on the screen. And then the flip side would be that instead we let them brand their signage like they have in their development, but it's accomplishing the wayfinding that we want for the green necklace. Does that make sense?
Clarifying question.
Yeah.
I'm hearing add more detail in terms of add more detail to be consistent with what the city is currently installing on our trails. But I'm also hearing still allowing them to stay on brand. So I guess I need to know what detail,
Ask your question.
what level of detail are we at? Are we looking for? Because this is now turning into a different policy question on wayfinding of
you made
of how much flexibility do we all want to allow developers when it comes to wayfinding signage?
Commissioner. So you made a point. I just want to make sure I understand. Is it as simple as it depends on where it's saying where to go? So if it's pointing to a thing on the sign that is Green Necklace or city, then it should match city wayfinders. If I'm in a neighborhood and it points to a park, it says, hey, park, that's a Highlands-owned little park, then they could do whatever they want. So really it comes down to what's it pointing to or talking about where to go, and that's what defines the style. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes. Yes, because the wayfinding in the Highlands is that's in the Highlands, pointing to other things in the Highlands. Shopping's here, parks there, whatnot. I mean, there's all kinds of arrows. Is very Highlands branded. We find it's within the Highlands, it's pointing to other things in the Highlands. Central Park is a city park, it's city branded. So keeping on that theme of if we're pointing them to a city resource, or, Green Necklace, which we call a city resource, consistent branding that the city has been using. So new development goes in, or I don't know, pick a development, and they want to put something within their little apartment complex that talks about where building A, B, and C are. That's fine, whatever their brand is for building A, B, and C. But then just outside, they have an arrow that says Rainier Trail. City branded, go to Rainier Trail.
Commissioner Zakharoff.
I have a question. Are any of the Highlands-owned parks a part of the Green Necklace or the Bricks to Picks?
No, they're not.
No. Okay.
And to help provide clarity, with this requirement, it's only going to be pointing to the city facilities being Green Necklace. So what I'm hearing is adding more detail to this standard so it is completely consistent with the same signage that the city is installing on city facilities.
I think my consideration for that, and maybe where I was going with it, was I imagine like the developer needing to fulfill this requirement, and basically we're giving them like a catalog of like, okay, here's our design, like how our signs are designed. Like you need to put one at this point that is adjacent to the trail, essentially, and they're kind of like picking which one they want for that. Is it that?
So with the slide that's on the screen now, in the third from the left, the shorter, skinnier, kind of bollard-looking signage, that is the type of wayfinding signage standard that the city uses. And so that's the signage we would be asking developers to put into their development.
Yeah.
To be completely consistent with what the city is installing. It wouldn't be a menu of different kind of signage like what's on the screen. It's just that one sign.
Gotcha. So then I think the question becomes, do we want it to be that, like that's the standard is they have to put that in adjacent to the Green Necklace, or does it have the flexibility to have that relative design, but it can be slightly different by color or whatever it is?
And that was what the original proposal was providing that flexibility so it could be, red or a different kind of font design to match what the development is going in. But what I'm hearing from the commissioners is do exactly what the city is installing for.
I think it could be as simple as if it points to city resources, things, then it should look like a city sign. Because then no matter where you are, it helps you figure out that's where I'm trying to go back to that trail, and it kind of works. The only time it may get confusing, here's a twist, is would they ever have a bollard that would have city thing this way or other thing this way? And is that such a corner case? Then maybe we just handle it, but it should look like a city one if it mentions anything on the city, but you're allowed to put pointing to something else that's not city, but that's a conversation. Or is that just such a corner case?
No, that's actually likely to happen with a lot of developments because if you have a large enough development that's having wayfinding and trail connection to the Green Necklace amenity, they might have some type of public amenity space as part of the development, like a small park, neighborhood park, that they also could be pointing to with this signage. And so the example you just gave, Commissioner Krass, is likely to happen quite a bit.
So I think one consideration to get around this might be that we add in part of the code is the talking about placement. So like if it's within some distance of like a trailhead, an intersection, or an entryway to a green necklace trail, that's where the city, that sign should go. Whereas like if it's a sign in the middle of their development that's pointing to their park, like she was saying about the Highlands, that can be their design, however they want to design it. Or it can fit more within the, I guess, flexible design standard versus the more city design standard that we have on the screen.
The scenario so I think the scenario is the hybrid scenario. So you can say, I have a new development. I'm right next to these great trails. I also have my own little like pool and things like that in my development. I want to have a wayfinder that says trails this way, pools this way. So do we say you have to use the city one? Do we, on the other side, say you could do whatever you want on your own? Or do we say, if you're only pointing to city stuff, then it should be city. If you also have on that same bollard things that are pointing to yours, we want you to use maybe the city's, whether it's color or font or whatever, something so it's not just totally disjointed, or is that, or do we say, okay, half of it has to be city and half you could have a hybrid where, but you don't want to lose totally the consistency. I think if you are pointing.
When it comes to signage, we legally can only regulate the design, not content. And so when it comes to this wayfinding site, it's actually easier just to say, you need to provide the same exact detail as the city, rather than trying to say, you can choose what you want on half and city design on the other half, because then you start getting in that gray area of, is this managing or regulating the context, which we can't do.
Commissioner Kennedy.
We're so in the weeds on this one. Because I'm trying to envision the scenario, if we're being too restrictive and what, the different scenarios we're talking about. And, the scenarios of it being within a community that no one on a trail already is going to see. Say you're on the Rainier Trail and there's a sign that says, community centers this way or whatever. Or something tells you where the Rainier Trail is. And it's all, city branded, and you're trying to follow it. Where did all this go? I understand I can take this to get to there. And you want to follow consistent signage to get there. But you're going along the way, and all of a sudden there's this new development. And you're like, okay, they've been really consistent, but that's different. Is that the same thing? Am I still on the right path? Has the yellow brick road turned red? Where am I? So I think my proposal for consistency is based on the user. If I'm somewhere where this is wayfinding and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going, that I really have a good consistent sense of that. If I've walked into a neighborhood, a development or whatever, and I'm within that construction, finding a building in that construction, I don't care, I'm not looking for the Rainier Trail. But once I'm on it and I'm out there looking for something specific to the city, I don't want the yellow brick road to turn a different color.
Commissioner Zakharoff.
So what I'm thinking is, first of all, as a part of the big community, I have big doubts that communal signs and city signs will be joined together because they serve a very different purpose. That might be a rare occasion, but I'm not sure they will be joined together. Like people will be putting a community pool and the trail on the same sign. That's very rarely happens, because if you don't belong to the community and you see the trail goes this way and then the pool goes that way, you will feel like you can use the pool. It kind of doesn't give you this clear guidance that the pool is only for community people because they pay their HOA dues. But in case this happens, my proposal is, if the sign mentions anything that belongs to the city, it has to look exactly like city sign. Now, if a developer wants to put a direction to one of their community amenities or anything else on the same sign, it should be uniformed with a city sign. Like they can put it on the same sign if they don't want to use a different sign for whatever reason, but it should be uniformed on the same sign with what CT is saying. Or they can put their own separate sign and of any color, any whatever they want to do. So, but all of the CT signs have to look exactly the same with no color change. It should be a font that has been given to them, like what we see here. Color is exactly the same, material is exactly the same, width, length, whatever else. All the same, material, yeah, material, I mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Vice Chair Patterson, if I can offer a proposal. I think hearing from all the commissioners, everybody is very consistent in terms of if the sign is pointing to a city facility, it should be consistent with city signage. We can add that detail in there. And like Commissioner Zakharoff was saying, if they're pointing to something else, which often they do, they're probably going to use universal symbols like some of the signage that you see on the screen. And they're not necessarily going to care whether or not the branding is going to be the same of what they're doing. This doesn't prevent them providing their own wayfinding signage of different design, branding, size on site, pointing to any other amenities. And so I think that addresses the other issues of being able to do the other branding. But for consistency's sake, having this particular signage pointing to the Green Necklace amenity or Peaks to Peaks amenity or whatever it gets called, it'll be the same design standard. Is that okay?
Awesome. Thank you, Stephen, for summarizing that so nicely. You are our chat GPT. We appreciate that. Madeline, did you get what you needed on this topic? Is there anything else that we can discuss?
I think I did get everything that I needed, as long as what Stephen said was everyone's consensus. Then I'm all set.
One follow-up question I have for the commissioners on going back to the noise code ordinance. Going back to Commissioner Krasa's question about generators. So I think I answered your question, but maybe there was a comment behind the question, because I know Commissioner Kennedy asked a very similar question in email prior to tonight's meeting. Is the desire that this code exemption apply to generators as well? Because it's not written that way, but the noise code in general does apply to generators.
So the scenario that I was thinking of is actually more single family, which may, so especially when you have, I used to live in Sammamish and all of my neighbors had them. We were holdouts. We never got a generator, which any noise of when you're cold and you hear someone else's generator makes you mad. So whether it was 10 decibels or 50 decibels, it doesn't really matter. But I think because the scenario would be someone is a single family homeowner and they want to install one of these natural gas generators to come on when they lose power. What regulations is it? It may be already covered in something else, or is it covered under this new one? But because it's a single family, they're not under the state, so it'd be the 73. I'm just trying to figure out in that. I was trying to think through the scenarios on that one. It's not going to be multifamily. They're not going to be putting generators in for all these townhouses. It's really going to be single family houses for the most part.
Well, I mean,
generators.
Considering our climate, more developments are considering more generators with installations, just so that, particularly in areas like ours where blackouts or power outages is going to be fairly frequent with any natural disaster. It's in consideration with new developments.
Okay, I've never seen it.
It's mostly with commercial or multifamily that you start to see it, but for single family residences, to answer your question, this noise code does apply to those generators. But there is different standards on installations for generators that apply different from this mechanical equipment.
And those are usually going to, I was thinking from a single family where you have more space to put them. Usually it's on the side of the garage or wherever. And I have no idea how loud they are, except when I'm cold, and they all seem really loud.
Commissioner Kennedy, so question to that is, do we know what the volume of a generator is? Because it seems to me like it's a lot louder than an air conditioner.
I mean, the intent of this code amendment was focused on AC units and heat pumps, so we didn't do the research, particularly in generators, but we can if that's a concern of commissioners.
If it's going to apply to generators, then it seems like we would need to do both.
The one thing also I would, so the use of air conditioning and heat is something you use all year round. when a generator has to come on, it's usually more, first of all, very seldom, and usually, well, I wouldn't call it an emergency, but it's a short-term thing. So I think having more leeway on those, even if they're louder, is probably fine. Meaning, you don't want to have such a difficult standard where if they're not built that, if they're already louder, then you don't have to have people build giant cocoons around their generator that comes on once a year for 2 hours.
And oftentimes that's the case when it comes to generators, because it's more of a temporary
Yeah, so I would
fix
say
for something.
I'd be more lenient on that, on those type, just because it's so infrequent and usually it's because of a need from Mother Nature versus AC runs every day.
Agreed. I mean, they're usually, knock wood, short-lived emergencies. I think it would just be making sure we're putting regulations in place to say, they're for emergency use. If the power goes out, don't continue to use your generator for other purposes. I still haven't thought of what those other purposes would be, but they are relatively noisy. So do we need to put some parameters around? That's totally fine. Power goes out, you have a generator, more power to you, use it, make sure you got some heat and light. But if the power's on, let's not continue to run it.
Just for clarification, the amendment proposed tonight for the noise code is primarily focused on heat pumps, AC units, and heating, cooling equipment. It doesn't apply to generators. We haven't heard that generators' noise is an issue, at least not at the same level that heat pumps have been raised to the city. And so we haven't done the research on what the general noise level is for a generator, at least commercially produced, or what we need to be regulating, or what even other building code standards may be applying for those kind of situations.
I'm okay with keeping this to heat pumps, ACs, and all that. Make sure it's called out. I think Jason's yellow hand is up.
Go ahead, Chair Voice.
My Simpson hand. Yeah, I kind of agree with Commissioner Krass and Stephen. I mean, it's really not an issue. Nobody wants to use a generator. They're horrible with energy use. They're expensive. It really is a short-term thing. The only thing I would add is, I mean, obviously in development, they can be used a little bit more frequently than just Mother Nature. But again, if it hasn't been a problem, typically when people do roll out generators or use them, it's kind of an everyone for themselves type thing anyway. So I don't know who would be going out checking in on noise violations when we lost the power a month and a half ago. So again, to me, it kind of seems like, I think Commissioner Krass's point to Stephen's point, I think we just stick with the ACs and the heat pumps and the things of that nature.
I will say though, in the code when it says heat pumps, air conditioners, and similar mechanical equipment, my mind does jump to generators at that point. So I don't know if it's worth saying except generators, or generators are covered somewhere else, or something along those lines. But
usually for that particular proposal, it's similar equipment to heating, cooling equipment, not necessarily any other just mechanical equipment.
Nope. Cool. Makes sense. No further questions from me. Anybody else?
Thank you, commissioners, for helping clarify at least one of my questions.
All right. I believe that wraps up our green necklace and heat pump noise topic. So are we transitioning over to docket review for 2025 with Stephen? Awesome.
Thank you, Vice Chair Patterson. Give me 1 second to get connected. All right. Thank you, commissioners. For this discussion, I'm going to discuss the 2025 proposed docket. As you may remember from last year, the docket is an annual process that we go through whenever there's potential comp plan amendments. For consideration tonight, there's 2 questions for the commissioners. Are there amendments presented on the docket that are not relevant or necessary? Or are there refinements that need to be made to any of the proposed amendments on the docket? Background information about the docket: this is a state required process for comp plan amendments. we're allowed once a year to conduct comprehensive plan amendments, and it has to start with this docket process, essentially identifying the list of potential comp plan amendments to be considered for the year. So the city has identified in the code the docket process that outlines each of the steps of how it needs to get approved, when it needs to get approved, which is what's starting with this meeting with the commissioners tonight. So the docket must be reviewed prior to starting any amendment process. This ensures that there's a more holistic and transparent process when it comes to comp plan amendments, particularly when it's conducted once a year. So for this year's proposed docket, there's 4 different items. The first item is a potential name change of single-family zones, or at least land use designations on the land use designation map, to accurately describe the allowed uses. And this is part of the middle housing project that you all have been started to discuss and will continue to discuss this year. The other change on the list that's proposed for the docket is allowing co-living housing. And this is a state-regulated or state-required change that we have to comply with for House Bill 1998. And that is to allow co-living in residential uses that allow more than 6 units. The third item on the list is updating the land use designation map. And there's 2 parts of this one. The first is as part of a rezone request for the food bank site just down the road over here, to allow the food bank to purchase the site and operate there long term. And as part of that, they have to change the land use designation from community facilities to retail. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a second. The other change that we're proposing for this year for the land use designation map is completely removing community facilities as a designated use. And that would allow us to defer each of the city-owned properties to the underlying zone, or at least more prominent use for that area. And I'll talk about this a little bit more. The last item on the list is for the transportation element. As part of this year, we're starting a concurrency evaluation project. So as part of that project, we may be proposing change policies in the transportation element as it relates to concurrency, and that discussion will return to PPC later this year. So going back to the community facilities and the food bank, I'll use the food bank as example for context for the whole community facilities change we're proposing. Right now, all city-owned facilities or properties are zoned and designated community facilities. And as you saw last year with like the City Hall Northwest rezone process, we have to essentially rezone and redesignate the land use anytime we have to surplus a property, which is very cumbersome because we can only do it once a year, which can limit the amount of surplusing or when we do surplusing each year, and is part of with the food bank purchase of the property. That is also can hold up a process when it comes to surplusing city properties. And so with the food bank property, it's currently designated community facilities and is proposed to go to retail, which is all the surrounding land use around it. In our zoning, that allows actually the food bank to operate on the site. You know, retail, it's not as intuitive with a retail land use that it's actually more than retail that actually operate on that site. And so with the complete change of community facilities from the land use designation map, that allows us to not have to go through this process every time we want to surplus a property.
Quick question.
Yes.
So is the city's, I read that, I wasn't sure. So is the city owns that land now and they're selling it to the food bank? Okay. Does it normally just go on the market? How does that normally happen? Is it when the city sells land?
It normally goes on the market. And so as part of it going to the market, we're going in agreement with the food bank to purchase the property, or the food bank to purchase the property.
But it doesn't go on open market? I'm just curious if this is...
No, for the purchase of this property, particularly because they're currently operating on the site and we have an agreement for them to operate on the site, we are able to go in an agreement for them to purchase the property and continue operating on the site. Is your question of whether or not it needs to go on the open market before sale?
I would have thought that if the city is selling property from a transparency standpoint, it would go on the open market to see what's the best value that the city would get from that versus just selling it to somebody who's already there.
when it comes to surplusing properties, there's different values that we're looking for in terms of financial benefit from surplusing the property. That's part of the things that the city looks at. There's also more of a community benefit from the surplus. And considering with the food bank's purpose and operations, that's actually a community benefit we're also wanting to maintain with the purchase of.
So, sorry to drill, this is totally not on the agenda, but it's, so once the food bank owns it and it's slated as retail, can they resell that to another retailer at a higher value? Or is there something stipulated that, because I'm assuming they're going to be paying less than what market value could be if it went on the open market. Is that correct?
I mean, with a typical purchase, yes, they could just resell the property, but I'd have to look into the agreement that the city's
Okay.
going in with the food bank on if there's any restrictions or covenants going in with the sale that restrict them from having to sell the property.
I'm just bringing this up from a transparency so people understand how these types work and they feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I have to look into it a little
Yeah.
bit more with how that agreement's going to be put in place. Any other questions on this one? One thing, I don't know if it's apparent or not with me explaining the community facilities and the food bank site is the two issues that we want to resolve with the land use designation map are related. If we remove community facilities as a land use designation, the food bank doesn't necessarily, or we don't necessarily need to change the land use designation. So one of these things is moving forward at the end of the year. It's either we're removing the community facilities from all these city-owned properties and just deferring it to the most prominent land use and going with those rezone, or the food bank's going to be changing the designation. Either way, it's going to be fixing the issue, particularly for the food bank. Yes.
Do we have a map available of what the other community facilities are that would be changing if that were to move forward?
We do, and we'll be bringing that discussion back to
Okay.
the Planning Policy Commission to take a closer look at all the properties that would change. So for the docket process, the process will go as follows. We'll return to the Planning Policy Commission for a public hearing on the docket on the 23rd, and then we'll take the docket to City Council early in March for potential adoption. For the amendment process, that'll follow each of their respective projects and come back to PPC as part of those projects, particularly for the change to the single family zone or land use designation will come as part of the middle housing project discussions with PPC. With concurrency, those discussions will also come back to PPC as we talk about the different policies for concurrency, co-living policies, the same, as well as with the community facilities and bringing back a map of all the city-owned properties that would be changing with this. And then at the end of the year, the code amendments or the comp plan amendments will come together as a final draft and then move forward with another public hearing with PPC and final adoption with City Council. And again, for the docket, what's being approved with the docket isn't necessarily the merits of any individual item on the list. It's just approving what's on the list to be considered for it to be an amendment. Okay, that concludes my presentation, Vice Chair Patterson.
Gotcha. So yeah, to summarize, basically we're just agreeing to talk about these items this year or not, right? We're not getting into super deep details tonight on what each topic is. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Excellent. Commissioners, any questions regarding the docket? Okay, seeing no questions from our commissioners, are there any final questions on the topic or anything you need from us, Stephen?
Just any final feedback on the questions for the docket? Is there any changes you want to make to the list? Is there any items that might be missing from the list?
You thought through it much more than we have, so we trust that you have all the right items on it.
Yeah, I think we look forward to diving more into those topics throughout the year, but
Yeah.
I think the list itself looks good.
And again, if as part of the respective projects that, you know, in those discussions, it comes out that we don't want to move forward with those changes, then they don't show up at the end of the year on the amendment process or the public hearing that will come back to the Planning Policy Commission. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen. Excellent. So the next item on the agenda is reports. Any city council updates?
I just have one quick city council update. So yesterday, the Planning Development Environment Council Committee met to talk about middle housing to help provide a little more context for the discussions we're going to be having with Planning Policy Commission in February. And so we'll be coming back with more discussions on middle housing, what's being proposed, and the and get some more direction in terms of how we want to approach the changes to regulations to comply with House Bill 1110 and House Bill 1337.
Excellent. And then any other business or announcement that you'd like to say tonight?
Just with the commission's calendar, we're still working on project schedules, and so you can probably by the next meeting you'll see some more changes to the items that'll be coming to the commission this year.
All right. And anything else for the good of the order this evening? Fair? Mission? All right. Well, with no further questions or business this evening, we will adjourn the meeting at 7:51 p.m.